It's been a while, a week. Last week I had Jason Kakush, a very close friend of mine. We discussed audio engineering. We also discussed a course that he is launching at Per-vurt School. And tonight as I said, I'm solo, as I do every 2 weeks. So I'll be with a guest next week, and another week, the week after, I will be solo again to discuss topics that I think are very important. So I chose for tonight a topic that has to do with DJ setups and the different techniques of performance, what modes of mixing or what gear or whatever. I'm not going to discuss any brands, by the way, or any there's no advertisement tonight, so it's going to be purely educational somehow. So some people ask me when they come to register at the school, or even some people I bump into at the clubs or something like that, they are into learning how to DJ or to perform, to mix, etc. But the question I always receive from them is, what should I use? I mean, they see their friends or colleagues, they use, like, for example, vinyl players. Some other people, they use digital controllers. Some other people, they use CD players or stuff like that. So the question is that I always receive from those people: what should I use? Which technique? Which one is better? Which one is cheaper? Which one is more flexible or portable, or etc. So tonight I will be talking about these modes or these techniques. As I said, I'm not going to discuss brands. I'm not advertising for any brand, and I'm also going to answer your questions in the second half of this show. So let's start. The first technique or the first setup that a DJ can think of, or if I may list them all first, we all know that some people use turntables, like the vinyl players. And by the way, this is the very first industry standard gear that was back in the 70s, 80s, etc., and still till now. So you have the vinyl turntable, vinyl players, those big turntables, or you have the CD players. Nowadays they are called multiplayers because they can also take USB, flash memory card, or whatever we call it. They also can take DVD data disc, or they can also be linked to control a software, etc. That was the second technique or mode or setup. And the third one is basically when you start using softwares and controllers. And this is when you get into the digital DJing or laptop DJing. And you also have different ways of performance, such as playing live using Ableton, using other softwares on the side. Sometimes you go into a hybrid setup, which is combining different gear together, different stuff together, and we will talk about this a lot. You also have another way of mixing, which is using your phone, your tablet, or your iPhone, Android, etc. Those smartphones, they can also have applications nowadays where you can use to mix. And believe me, guys, those small tablets and small stuff, they can do really good, and you can really mix an endless set with no mistakes, etc., using just your smartphone or a tablet or an iPad or etc. So let me talk about the vinyl mixing. Okay, so that's the first technique that I'm going to discuss tonight, because if you go back in time, if you go back to the 70s, for example, the days of the disco vinyls and stuff like that, you will notice that the vinyl itself used to be less available. You know what I mean? It used to be, there were, if you take a look at the number of labels also they were releasing music, you will have a very limited list compared, relatively to what we have nowadays. The endless number of labels that, you know, every single day you have a new label, you have a new artist, etc., etc. So in the past, when the music was released on vinyl. That was in the early 70s, of course. I mean, not the early 70s, the vinyl was invented, but when the vinyl player was there, the vinyl player that was used for DJing, the DJs were more selective. So they used to go to a vinyl or record store, and they used to just skim through the vinyls, listen to the music on the vinyls, and those vinyls were kind of, I mean, relatively to what we have now, they were kind of limited somehow. So, for example, if you go to a record store, you find like 1 million vinyls. You go to the other record store, you will find 1,000,001 maybe. So you find a lot of common vinyls because those were the only vinyl released everywhere. It depends, of course, how well distributed they are, etc., etc., etc. So in the days of vinyl, when the DJs were using vinyl players, and that was the very first way of DJing. Of course, I'm not talking about cassette tapes and stuff like that. It was the industry standard, as we call it. Okay, so in the days of the SL1200 or other vinyl players, they were using this vinyl record, the 12-inch or etc. So some people ask, should I start DJing or should I start learning how to use the vinyl player? Is it flexible? Is it hard to DJ using vinyl player? What is it all about? How does it work, etc., etc., etc.? And I'm going to give you the summary of all these things. Okay, so in the days of vinyl, when you used to go to the record store and listen to vinyls, you used to just hold something. It was a physical vinyl. It was a physical product. Okay, so when you buy the vinyl, you own a product. Okay, and the vinyl, it used to fit, like, I mean, as an average, it used to fit maybe 2 tracks on the A side and 2 tracks or 3 tracks on the B side, or even 1 track per vinyl on the A side and 1 track on the B side, etc. So when you used to go and buy a vinyl, it was a kind of an LP with very limited tracks. Nowadays, when we release digital, we call it EP. Okay, so you don't have, like, for example, top 100 tracks on one vinyl. That doesn't fit. So you are more selective when you have vinyls, but of course you have a lot of disadvantages of owning and playing vinyls, etc., etc., etc. So now we're talking about the record itself. It is nowadays less available because labels are not releasing on vinyl. Few labels are releasing on vinyl still, but if you want to have for example, some tracks that you like, and it is not available on vinyl, you cannot buy it on vinyl. So the number of labels releasing on vinyl is very limited now, and the vinyl shops, also the record stores, they sell vinyl, they are also not available anywhere, everywhere, etc. So that's the first downside of having of starting a career using vinyl player. And the second disadvantage of it is how heavy vinyls are. So if you want, for example, to play 40 tracks, that's, let's say, 30 to 40 to 50 vinyls in your crate, you have to hold and take it with you everywhere, and it's so heavy, and it's so expensive. And there's an advantage to it, that you are more selective and you own a physical copy of a vinyl. It's more ethical to buy music nowadays, not to illegally download music. But there are there's, I mean, a list of downsides or disadvantages to that. Now, when we talk about the quality of the vinyl, of course, that's the most important advantage of it, because with vinyl you're dealing with an analog signal. Okay, you're not dealing with distorted or pixelized signal somehow. When you compare it to digital, it's a real vinyl. You're not converting an analog signal to a digital signal and so on. It's just the vinyl, the music. There is a warmth in it. It's fat, it's warm, it's nice, especially when you play vinyl in big room events where you have those huge speaker sound system setups, etc., etc. The sound is very different. Of course, when we also talk about big setups, big speakers, and you can feel that the vinyl has some warmth to it, not a crispy, distorted kind of sound like the digital nowadays. So when you DJ using a vinyl player, now let's talk about DJing with vinyl. Let's say you have a vinyl, you have your vinyls with you, like 40, 50, and you don't have a problem carrying them with you to the gig, etc., etc., etc. We talked about the availability of the vinyls. Those are not available so much. You cannot find every single track on vinyl. Like, labels are not releasing the catalogs on vinyl, not all of them. In the past days, in the early, maybe 70s, this is what we had, okay? Vinyl record stores, etc. You go there and you find what you want. You buy the physical vinyl itself. You can have like a copy of it. You touch it, you have it. It's not like a file you download from the internet, etc., etc., etc. We talked also about the quality of it and so on. So let's say you have this vinyl crate with you and you don't have a problem with what I talked about. You want to play on vinyl. So one thing that I see very, very important when you start playing on vinyl is when you start understanding the touch of it, okay? Like when you start to do the back cueing to search for a beat or for a sound, etc. That's something that it's ear training, okay? When you back cue to search the kick, there is a sound to it, a scratching sound to it, etc. And that's what makes you busy on stage. That's one part of it, of course. And when you start to go back and forth to look for a beat or something like that, you start to get more used to the sounds themselves, like the beat, the kick, the snare, the hi-hat. If you back flip it, let's say, what does it produce? Which sound, which scratching sound does it produce? Even if you are scratching DJ and you want to scratch, you always go through the sounds and you just back cue something, and you can notice a certain sound, because frequencies, this is different sounds have different frequencies, etc., etc., etc. So when you start scratching on the vinyl, you have more knowledge about the sounds themselves. You'll be more creative somehow. Even when you get into production, you will start using this technique. Sometimes when I produce music, I always reverse a certain sound or whatever. So this is also something you enjoy with vinyl. Now, there's also a kind of social aspect to it. When you go and buy a vinyl, you go to a record store, you find all the people there, you meet a lot of people, they are all searching for different vinyls. There is a social aspect to it. You meet a lot of people, you share, it's when you go buy vinyl, you go for 3, 4, 5 hours and just time flies. And this is the beauty of it, again. And you have a lot of other aspects of, advantages of dealing with vinyl, playing with vinyl, etc., etc., etc. So, one thing that is nowadays that I find very, it's not really flexible, or it's a kind of a limited way of mixing nowadays, because we are in the digital era, and I'm going to talk about this technique. We discussed the 5 different setups you can have, and this is the first one, the vinyl setup. In the digital era nowadays, I don't see that with all the performances / playing loops, remixing on the fly, etc. Vinyl is not flexible to do that. In the vinyl era, beat matching was like, it was the most important aspect of DJing. If you do not beat match, you're not a DJ. That's how it was, okay? So beat matching using vinyl player is not easy at all, because the vinyl is, it's spinning and spinning and spinning. You don't have a cue point to go back to it. You have to use your hand, you have to touch the vinyl, you have to kind of have this relationship with the vinyl. You have to turn it backward, go back to your cue point and release it again in case you did a mistake. You want to prepare a certain mix, and you don't have a BPM counter. That's the most important thing about it. You don't have a counter that will tell you what is the tempo of the song or the beats per minute, like 128, 120, something like that. So you don't have this technology in the vinyl player. It's so basic, it's so essential, yes, and it's kind of the people who use vinyl, they would always argue that if you want to learn DJing, you have to start with vinyl. I don't agree, of course, and this is just a method, a way of mixing among 5 other ways that I find more interesting nowadays. So again, the vinyl way of DJing, it has its magic, it has its advantage, disadvantage, etc. Plus the vinyl player, the industry standard players nowadays are not available, like the Technics and stuff like that. So you have different ways also. It's very expensive nowadays, and it's very heavy. Even the vinyl player itself, not only the records that you have to hold with you and carry all around, it is heavy and it takes a lot of space, and not all the clubs have vinyl players nowadays. So unless they rent a pair or more for you, or unless you go there with your own vinyl player, maybe you will not find this setup at clubs. Okay, so that was that was about the vinyl player. Of course, we have a lot of other aspects. How does it function, etc. We can talk about this in later session. But by the way, I talked about this maybe in G.GOES Live 1 or 3. How does it function, the needle, etc., the frequencies they get, etc. I discussed this in previous episodes, so you can go back and watch. By the way, it's on my Facebook page, the Per-vurt page, and we have Majam here. Hello, Majam. Thanks for joining. And he's saying, Iftar ended. Now all central Beirut speeds have been sucked. Come on, Ojero, get your act together. He's saying some important stuff. Okay. By the way, Majam, this is not going to stay online, this video. It's just for live. But every single episode is going to be uploaded in HD, because I'm shooting with 1, 2, 3, 4 cameras. And there will be an edited version of this episode. After 2 days, it will be on my Facebook page, where I have all the G.GOES Live in a playlist, and you can watch them. And by the way, I'm calling you out to be my guest whenever you can, and maybe one day I will ask people to tag whomever they want to be with me in this show, and I'm sure they will tag you. Many people will tag you. Anyway, so that was the first method of DJing using vinyl players. The second one is nowadays called DVS. Since we're talking about vinyl, there's a digital vinyl system, which is the DVS. Okay, that's a new technology. It's not so new, by the way, but with the advancement of technology, they invented a way to use a virtual vinyl, which is the same material, the same vinyl as in the as in the vinyl itself. Okay, you use a virtual vinyl, a tractor vinyl, let's say tractor scratch vinyl, and this is called time code. Okay, time code vinyl. So what does it do exactly? This vinyl has a lot of when you put the needle on it, I mean, it gives you like one tone, something like this. Okay, so what does it mean? It generates a certain tone, and it has no music. This vinyl, which has, for example, the Serato or the tractor logo on it, it's one vinyl that you use the whole night. It's just one vinyl, but it has no music on it. But this vinyl can generate some pulses to control timing in your software. Okay, so this thing requires a sound card to translate those frequencies generating by the needle, and it will translate them into pulses or time codes, because we are translating an analog signal coming out from this vinyl to a signal that is digital, giving code to the software to do one of the three things. It tells the software about the speed of the vinyl. So you can use any vinyl player, like the old vinyl players. You're just translating a certain signal called analog coming out of the vinyl through the vibration of the needle, etc., on the surface of the vinyl. Those frequencies emitted will act as a time code. Okay, so when you push the fader or when you pitch up or down, you're increasing the speed or decreasing the speed of your song. You are, of course, generating a different tone, a high-pitched tone or a low-pitched tone. And all those tones generated by the vinyl will tell the software about the speed of your pitch, about the vinyl, the turntable. So if you want to increase the tempo, you can just increase the tempo and you will have a higher pitch coming out of the vinyl. This will be translated into a code. This code goes to the software. The software will go faster. I mean, the pitch control on your software, like what, let's say you're using a tractor software or a Serato software, it will be faster. Okay, now what's the second thing that can be translated? It's the direction of the vinyl. because some people, they scratch. If you're going forward with the vinyl, if you're playing the vinyl, not scratching, not going backward, it also generates some tones, some pulses that will be turned into codes, in digital codes, and it will tell the software, whether it's Traktor or Serato or whatever, it will tell the software in which direction the music is going. Is it going forward or it's going backward when you scratch on it, okay? And the third thing that this time code DVS vinyl system can tell your software is the current playback position. So for example, if you move the needle to somewhere on the vinyl player, you are jumping in your software on one of the decks of your software. You're jumping, for example, to minute, let's say 2 second, etc. Okay, even if you start spinning the vinyl going forward in time, you're telling the software about the current position of your song, where it is exactly. So in the DVS system, you're already in the digital world, but your touch is kind of you have this physical touch on the vinyl. It's like playing on a normal vinyl, but of course the music, the audio quality is coming out from your sound card. It's a digital quality. It's not an analog signal. The analog signal coming out of the vinyl, which is the virtual vinyl, is only going to be translated into codes. Okay, that's how they kept the old vinyl players that have no USB connection to your computer, no converters like all the players nowadays. They kept, you can use it, you don't throw it anymore. But if you want to move into the digital technology using the vinyl as a controller now, you can still do that. Okay, so some people, when they face this fact that they cannot find all the music they like on vinyl anymore, because labels are not releasing on vinyl and they are limited with the music selection they have, they wanted to keep the vinyl feel and the technique of using the vinyl with the scratching and everything, using the needle. They're using their own vinyl player. But what happened is that with the DVS technology, you are just having your library on MP3 or WAV or whatever in the digital, in your software, in your database, on your hard drive, on your computer, and you're just kind of controlling those songs or tracks inside your computer via this vinyl, which is a pure analog vinyl player. Okay, so this is also another way of using the vinyl player but going into the digital world, which I'm going to talk about now. Okay, now I discussed the vinyl era, which was in the 70s, etc., 70s, 80s. Still now they are still using vinyl, but something happened in the early 90s. Okay, in the early 90s, with the MP3 coming in massively, and all those digital files and stuff like that, some brands, I'm not going to mention, of course, the pioneer of them was Pioneer. Okay, Pioneer DJ or Pioneer. They invented the DJ CD player. Okay, and that was in the early 90s. I think it was in the 93. Yeah, maybe 93. They invented the DJ CD player that was reading CD on disc. Okay, so that's when CD players, when it comes to DJing, I mean, because the CD was before that, but the CD DJ player, if I may call it, it was in the early 90s, and that was a revolution in the DJ industry, because people are now moving towards CD. Okay, the CD can fit more songs, like 13, 14, 20 maybe. It depends on the length of the song, of course. And people nowadays, I mean, back then, they have more music on discs. Okay, on CD. So the CD players, I remember that was the CDJ 500, the very first CDJ 500. It used to be called CDJ 300. I don't know why. And that was it got implemented in clubs, and people started to use the CDJs. Okay, so one of the features, it's kind of similar somehow, but now you're in the digital. You have a laser beam reading billions and billions of digital information, and those basically those are your music on the CD. And when this laser beam reads those information, it also, at the end of the day, it translates them into pulses, electrical pulses. This pulse, those electrical pulses travel through the analog cable to your speaker. Your speaker starts to vibrate according to the electrical pulses that it's receiving. So that's when the conversion of signals started to happen from digital to analog and vice versa. Okay. Now with the CD player, now you have more features. Of course, you still have the pitch controller where you can pitch the song. You can pitch it up or down. You can make it faster, slower, etc. And you have a screen showing you the track a number, showing you the time remaining of the track. Those features were not available with the vinyl player. The vinyl player, it only had a pitch controller, not all of them, by the way, a pitch controller and a play button. That's it. That's what it had. Okay, so you had to do all the beat matching manually and stuff like that. We talked about it minutes before. And now with the CD player, you have I'm talking about the very early CD players in the early 90s. You have at least a screen showing you some information that you cannot find on a vinyl player. And of course they implemented something because you're working with a disc, so that was easier for them to create a new technology called a cue point. Okay, so that's, you don't have the play anymore only, I mean you have a play turned into a play / pause, and then you have a cue. Okay, and so what does the cue do? Basically the cue, it saves a point in your music, it puts it on hold, and it waits for you to press play where you start the music from that point. In the vinyl player you had to back cue, and search for the very first beat, very first transient of the kick drum, for example, and then you just release your hand on the vinyl and it plays. So if you do a mistake, you have to go back cue again on the headphones, listen to the music again, and release. So it took more time. Some people say it's more fun, etc. But again, it's a taste, and it's everyone has a taste in DJing. So back to the CD player. Now you have the cue. It saves a point in this song, and when you press play, you will just release the music from this specific point. And when you just press on cue again, you will go back to that point. So you don't have to search again for a cue point, etc., etc. And with the evolution of the CD player, they started to implement more and more features. For example, they started to implement something called looping. And on the fly, you can take an in point and an out point. That's an in and an out. And in this section over here, the music starts to repeat itself. It's a loop. Okay, so for example, if there is a chop of a vocal or whatever, you can take a loop on one sentence, and this will keep on repeating at the in and the out point. So again, at that point in time, you had to be very careful when you're taking the in and the out, because when you're pressing on in, you are in live mode. Yeah, if you do a mistake, if you're not exactly on the beat, you will have a kind of not quantized or not perfect loop. Okay, and even if you press in the wrong way on the out point, the loop will not be exactly on the same grid, or it not be quantized. At some point when it loops back again, it might not be beat matched with whatever you are mixing. So and again, with the early 2000 something, they started to create more and more features. Some of the features were like a graph. You can see the ups and downs of the track, where you have more and more elements in the track, where you have a break, etc., etc., etc. And I'm not going to discuss all the players, but nowadays when we talk about the CD player, it's no longer called a CD player anymore. It's called a multiplayer. Okay, a multiplayer nowadays is a player that can take multiple modes, like multiple. You can choose to play a CD. You still have the CD engine in it. You can choose to have a USB stick in it, so that's a USB mode. You can choose to have it connected to your computer or laptop, and this will control your software, so that's going to be a MIDI controller as well. So it's a multiplayer. Or you can also have it as a full MIDI controller, not only a controller for a specific software. It could be a controller for a production software or whatever. Some players nowadays are implemented in this way. Okay, so with the technology now, the CD player, which is now the industry standard, it might not be a CD player anymore, because with everything that is coming out now, they are kind of canceling the CD engine, because they want the prices to go down a little bit, and also they want to have more features with less price because of the competition as well. We have a lot of competition nowadays between brands, and they are all kind of implementing more features with less price, removing some features that are not really important nowadays, like CD. I barely find a CD, like a box of empty CDs nowadays. We used to find them everywhere. Nowadays, I cannot even find one. And I don't know why I would search for a CD anymore while I have a USB stick, okay, that can fit more, and it's portable. You can delete stuff from it, etc., etc., etc. So now with the multiplayer, DJs are using their USB stick. Why? Because the USB can fit a lot of data, like 500 gigabyte. Last time I saw a USB, a very small micro USB with 500 gigabyte of data. And you can, of course, have folders in it. It's kind of like your hard drive in a mini way. And the good thing about the players nowadays is that they can read more information, more digital information coming out of the USB. So with some features, for example, like the Nexus features and with the Pioneer, you are now communicating with the software. Not live, you're not controlling the software live, although you can, I'm not talking about this, but you can prepare your playlists on your record box, let's say, software. You can prepare your hot cues. You have more than one cue point nowadays. You can take multiple cue points. You can prepare your grid point. I'm going to talk about this also in a minute. You can prepare, for example, the name of the track, change the name of the track, make it more organized, add some color to it. You can color code your music nowadays. You can prepare playlists, have some tracks, for example, in the warm-up, all bundled together in one playlist. You can have folders of playlists, etc., etc., etc. You can have a lot of things prepared on your record box, on your laptop, and you export all these information, including the music files, of course. You export them to your USB, and this is something that your player nowadays, your multiplayer, can also read. Those information, the metadata and the digital information, can also be there on your player, like the full wave representation of the track, like the name of the track, color coding, the playlist. You can browse through, you can search for a track nowadays on the player. You can do loops that are perfect, quantized, without any mistake. You can also, for example, delete something that you prepared on record box before and just make it better, correct it, etc. You can have a lot of cue points. You can jump through cue points. You can have memory points for you to understand the structure of the song. Where do you want to mix? Where is the best point of mixing? Phrases, bars. You have something to let you count as well. So it's making DJing very, very easy nowadays. You also have something that I did not mention, which is the sync functionality. The sync functionality is very, very, very important. Some people are against this. I am with it, of course, if they already know the essential, the foundation of DJing. For example, if the sync function stops working, what do you do on stage? You do nothing. You go home crying, etc. So you have to learn how to beat match. You have to learn how to do all these things without technology. But after that point, I am completely with the technology of using sync, or using quantize, or using loops on the fly, or using anything that the technology has to offer. Okay, so people who are arguing against sync or against anything, I want to ask them, what do you use? If you're using a CD player, already you're in the digital world. So why are you using a CD player? You cannot argue, and you are in it already. Okay, so if you are a vinyl player, I can understand what you mean. You love the vinyl method, fine. But if you are already using a CD player and you're against sync, you have to consider, I don't know, I cannot say more than this. I have to be respectful at some point, okay? So, of course, when you use sync, with extended music, like say if you're playing techno and if you're playing, for example, house music or whatever, long extended mixes, I am with the fact that sync will make you kind of it's a boring technique of mixing. So if you press sync and you play and you have nothing to do, you just wait for the next track and the next track. So this aspect is also important to mention. But with sync, I mean when you want to play on 4 decks, or you want to introduce a lot of loops or samples, or you want to do performance with your players, sync is a must. You cannot do it without it. And to be honest with you guys, I am with a perfect flow, perfect mix, whether you're using vinyl, CD player, cassette tape, pre-recorded mix, I don't care. Okay. With those functionalities that are available nowadays in the multiplayers, among them sync functionalities and quantization, taking perfect loops, etc., even browsing music playlists, etc., etc., etc. Those are this is the DJ setup that is available everywhere nowadays in clubs. Okay, so if you go to any club, you might not find a vinyl player, but surely you will find CD players, or we call it multiplayers nowadays, because they take USB and stuff like that. Okay. Now, some people ask, why do you have 4 decks? Why not 2? Because you're mixing 2 songs at the end of the day. Yes, that's the classic way of mixing. It's 2 or more. And some people choose to have 4 decks just because they like to mix 3 tracks, for example. Or they might take a loop from a song and mix 2 other songs with it, etc., etc. Some people, they implement 4 CD players, sometimes 8 CD players, because when you have a festival, for example, and people are coming to take over one after the other, like a DJ finishes his set and you have another DJ coming to take over, some people, they don't like to interfere with the decks used by the artist before, so they go prepare their music on another deck, and that's it. They start to mix all together. And some people, they implement 4 players just for security purposes. For example, if a player stops, you have a backup, you have a plan B, etc. So you have so many reasons why you have 4 CD players. But I see that it depends on the style that you are mixing. If you're mixing like hip hop or dance music, commercial stuff like that, you might need to mix 4 songs at the same time, or loops from tracks, or even a cappellas, mash up things together. And this is where the sync functionality is very important, okay? Because you cannot do that by just beat matching all those channels together, okay? So we talked about vinyl, we talked about DVS, which is the digital vinyl system. We talked about the CD players / multiplayers, they are called nowadays. And we still have 2 more or 3 more, I think, techniques or setups to talk about. And one of them is, of course, the digital controllers, okay? So those are the MIDI controllers. They are controlling a software. Laptop is a must here, or at some point you can use the controllers to control your phone, smartphones, tablets, etc., etc., etc. Like Tractor, for example, Tractor S2, S4. It can also control your tablet or your iPhone, or etc. So with the controllers, first of all, when after the 2004 era, 2003 or 4, when Beatport was released, iTunes, etc., people started to buy music. Some people started to download music illegally, etc., etc., etc. We started to have like this huge evolution of MP3 and downloads and stuff. We don't have CDs anymore. We don't have vinyl that much, and that was the time when people started to look for more stuff, more techniques, more and more stuff, more options, if you want, with less or cheaper or more affordable prices. So digital controllers like MIDI controllers, they were there till now, of course, and we are always moving to forward in this technology. And those controllers are relatively speaking, they are cheap. They are not so expensive. And what they do, basically, it's just a MIDI controller that looks like a mixer with 2 decks on the side, but actually it doesn't have any audio processing in it, except for the sound card, of course. But this thing is just a controller. It sends and receives MIDI signal, okay? So what does it do exactly? Your focus, your job, I mean, everything that you're doing is inside your software. It's not on board on the machine. It's inside your software, whether it's Tractor, whether it's Serato, or whether it's a record box, etc. Any software can be controlled by a MIDI controller, and this cheap, nice, good-looking controller that you find like hundreds of different brands and different models. What it does, it sends a signal to your software and it orders the software to do something. So now we're talking about controllers / MIDI, and we're talking about the software. When we discuss a software or application on phones, we are talking about endless possibilities. We're talking about billions and billions of calculations in the computer brain, okay? So that's more and more functions that you cannot find on CD players sometimes, and surely not on vinyl players. So nowadays, you can introduce loops, samples. You can play 13 tracks at the same time, 13 loops. You can perform live. You can kind of mash up, remix, produce live on stage. You can do all those crazy remixes on the fly. This is something you cannot do using a vinyl player or a CD player sometimes. And that's all, by the way, that's all sync based, okay? So we're not really talking about a classic way of mixing anymore. There's no muscle anymore, muscle showing anymore. So people who use vinyl and who are always nagging or going against sync or whatever, show me what you can do with your vinyl players like a 10 years old kid using a software. Show me. If you can show me that you can do like him, I will show you my bald hair. I will no longer wear a cap. Okay? So you can never do those things, and at some point those things might be annoying, okay? If you're like mashing up 4 or 5 tracks at the same time, sometimes it might turn out to be annoying, okay? So there is also some philosophical and creative aspect behind using controllers, okay? So less is more sometimes more is more. It depends, okay? It depends on the style. It depends on where you're mixing, what you're mixing, who you are, which club, which crowd, etc., 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 okay? So what can you do with the controller? Basically, you can have more and more features. You have onboard effects. You pay less money. You can change. You can expand your setup. You can have more controllers on the side. You can work on 2 laptops like James Abila used to do. He used to have Ableton on one laptop and Tractor on the other laptop. They are all synced together. The 2 laptops are synced together, and he used to play on both. Okay, he used to, for example, play something on Tractor, and the music is exported from Tractor maybe through send return going into Ableton, for him to be able to use the Ableton devices, like those crazy delays, effect, reverbs, etc., and then going out to the mixer, etc., etc., etc. So with the digital controllers, with the software technology, you can have more and more techniques, more features, more crazy stuff to do. Also, the controller is very portable. You can take it with you anywhere. It's a very small controller. You can have it with you. You can go to a club, for example, have any space for it. You can have it on the CD player, put something underneath it, etc. But laptop is a must, as I said, and without a laptop, a controller cannot function. It doesn't work, okay? And with those digital functions, by the way, and with the evolution going forward, you are now moving into something called live performance. And I discussed this a lot in previous episodes. And in the performance, you're not only mixing 2 songs in a classic way. You're not only mixing 4 songs in a classic way. You can implement beats, samples. You can start to play drums on the fly. You can start to play loops on the fly. You can take loops from the song and play them some with other tracks, etc., etc., etc. Okay, and of course, when we are talking about the digital world, whether we are using a USB stick, with the CD player or the software hard drive, etc. Nowadays, we don't have to carry all those vinyls. We don't have to carry all those CD bags. It's just maybe 500,000 tracks in one USB stick. Of course, there's a compromisation here. You don't have the same quality with the vinyl. I'm with it. There is no huge difference, by the way. I hate those people who just who are so anal about it. It's not a huge difference, okay, unless you're hearing it on a massive sound system, etc. Okay. And there's one downside to it, to the controllers, is that, for example, I don't know if you can trust technology or not. Sometimes if anything goes wrong, maybe with a driver clash, or maybe the battery of your laptop, or maybe the USB cable, it got unplugged by mistake. Anything that can happen with digital technology, it's very risky to go and perform live. And I don't know if you can do, like, for example, this band, Buka Shade, maybe, or not Buka Shade, I forgot the band. They have like a system where you have two laptops, okay, two Mac Pros or whatever. If one of them crashes, the second one will take over, and there will not be any stop in the music, nothing, not even 1 second, okay? And of course, the controllers are not industry standard nowadays. If you go to a club, you will not find a controller unless this club is a bar, small bar, or whatever. So this is not an industry standard. Also, if you take your laptop, your controller with you, if you don't have a laptop, you want to use the laptop of the pub or whatever, you might need to go back and install the drivers on this laptop. So it's always something that requires a lot of things. Okay, the digital technology has a lot to offer, yes, but it is not that flexible when it comes to setting it up in clubs, especially when you have a lot of DJs playing before you, etc., 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 or after you sometimes. So you have to unplug, plug, etc. And sometimes when you are using the CD players that are there in everywhere, most of the DJs I see nowadays, they use the multiplayers as controllers. Okay, so those multiplayers, they don't use a USB stick, they connect it to the laptop and they use it as a controller. When they press play on the CD player, nothing on the CD player will play, no music on the CD player. The music will be triggered on the software, on Tractor, for example. So instead of buying this small portable MIDI controller that I discussed before, you can use those Pioneer players that you find everywhere. You can use them as MIDI controllers, okay? Some people choose that, some people choose not to do that. I am, when I perform, I just take my USB stick and I play on board, on the CD player. But I see a lot of people, for example, when you go to a club and you see people using the CD player Pioneer, at the same time they have a laptop. I get a lot of people asking me about this. So how come he's using the CD players and those are not controllers? Why does he have a laptop on the side? No, those CD players are controllers, okay? So they are linked to his laptop, and what he is actually doing, he's using the functionalities of the CD player or multiplayer, and those functionalities are just sending a signal to the software, and the music is processed in the software. Of course, it can be processed through the sound card of the CD player, and again going out on the same channels of the mixer and back to any PA system or whatever. Okay, so you have a lot of things going on. You have a lot of options. You can use but again, if you want to go and set up the CD players that you find in any club, you want to set them up to control your software, whether it's Tractor or whatever. This takes time, okay, and it's a bit risky. I always advise people to go and do the sound check and just check if the firmware is updated, if the mapping files are already on the computer, if the computer accepts those kind of players or not, if the software is updated or not. You have so many problems that can happen using CD players as controllers or using MIDI controllers by themselves. Okay, so I advise people who want to perform to, of course, learn how to use the industry standard gear, which is nowadays the multiplayers, okay, the Pioneer multiplayers. Now you have a fourth or fifth, I cannot remember how many I mentioned so far, but you have another method of DJing, which is nowadays using your phone, your iPhone or your tablet, iPad, etc. If you have an application on this tablet, you can just mix perfectly like any big DJ, and you can just use your small iPhone to do a proper mix. Okay, now of course the touch feature of it is a bit tricky, but sometimes you have very small devices, like very small MIDI controller. I said I don't want to discuss brands, but I can tell you, you have IK Multimedia, for example. They have this small mixer. You can plug it to your tablet or whatever, and you can use it as a mixer, as a controller with low, mid, high and channels, etc. So sometimes you can use a wireless controller that can control your phone, or can control your software, or can control, etc., etc., etc. So you can jump to the crowd, you can be with the crowd, and you can just mix while it's like a joystick. It's like a what do you call it, a PlayStation, what do you call this, I forgot. Okay, so it's like a very small controller, wireless, for example. You can use it to mix, and since everything is sync based, quantized, warped professionally, you don't have to worry about anything, because everything will be beat matched, everything will be on the same grid, everything will be perfect. Okay, now I'm not also discussing the I'm not discussing the ethical aspect behind it. Everyone is free to use any method. I am totally against people judging or nagging or whatever. I am considering myself always as the crowd, as someone going to a club to listen to good music, listen to a good flow. I don't care what this DJ is using, whether he's using vinyl, CD player, laptop, a controller, etc. Okay, so please guys, just go enjoy music. Don't go to the DJ booth and judge the DJ what he's using. Care for having good time, listen to good music, and listen to a nice flow, regardless of what's behind the scene, what this DJ is using. It's not your business anyway. Okay, it's not my business, it's not your business, it's not anyone's business. So the last thing I want to discuss, we talked about phones and tablets. As I said, you have applications nowadays, you can use them to mix properly, perfectly, etc. And also the last one, the last method, or the last setup you can have is basically a hybrid setup. Hybrid setup, I forgot one more setup. I will tell you about it at the end. The hybrid setup is a setup that consists of many things at the same time. So for example, you go there, you see one vinyl player, for example, analog mixer, you find a CD player, you find a controller, laptop, and maybe a wireless or maybe an iPhone on the side with a drum pad on it, and maybe you find an iPad with an effect processor in it. So everything is connected together. That's called a hybrid setup. A hybrid setup can consist of so many things at the same time. And this is when we get closer to the last point I want to discuss, which is live performance. That's no longer a DJing anymore. I discussed this a lot with my previous guest, Elias, Atomic Circus, aka Stamina. And we talked about performance, live performance, which is nowadays taking over also in Lebanon, okay? And what is it about exactly? In live performance, you can go crazy, you can go analog, you can go digital, you can go both, you can go hybrid as well. But with this live performance, there is one software for that, with no competition for it at all, with nothing to come against it or next to it or better than it, or etc., 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 which is Ableton Live, of course. This software is made exclusively for, or let me say, this technique of mixing is exclusively offered by this software, which is Ableton Live. Okay, Ableton Live is a production software as well. You can mix, master, you can do video editing also on Ableton. You can produce, you can sound design, you can do many things. Okay, but one of those things is when you want to do a live performance, live jamming maybe in the studio, or even performing live to a crowd. So Ableton Live is like a software with so many options. You have a lot of scenes, a lot of slots where you can have your clips in it, prepared clips or produced clips, or you can just do some recordings live on stage, have them loop endlessly, etc., etc., etc. That's a platform for live performance. If you want to do a classic mixing, like mixing 2 tracks together or 4 tracks, it's a no to use Ableton Live, because Ableton Live is not made for DJing. It's not flexible at all to DJ 2 tracks only, because the tracks must go through a process called warping first. Warping is when you take all the beats that are not quantized due to many reasons I can explain later on. Among them, for example, when you turn a track from an uncompressed version to a compressed version, you will lose the grid somehow. The beats will no longer be quantized, will no longer be sitting where they should be or where they were in the first place in the software. So when you remove the grid out of the software, you will have some addition, or for example, you might have some variable tempo that you cannot notice while hearing the music, but you will notice when you are mixing the tracks. Sometimes the tracks will drift. Okay, so you have to go back and warp the track. Warping a track meaning taking all the beats of the track and putting them on the grid again. So you will cancel all the variation of tempos in between the beats, etc., 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 and your track will become stable again. After this process, you can mix. Okay, so it's time consuming. It's not flexible at all to use Ableton for DJing. Okay, but if you want to go crazy with performance, like mixing loops and samples, not mixing 2 songs only, you can use Ableton Live, which is nowadays what we are doing. We are actually doing a lot of awareness about this. We're kind of trying at Per-vurt here to introduce new courses to teach performance, which we have been doing actually since 2 years, 3 years now. And now we're just giving specialist courses on this live performance technique of DJing, of doing live acts. Okay, and you can stay in the box, you can stay inside Ableton, you can stay with the software only, or you can implement the software with a band, let's say, or with a lot of people using instruments. Okay, so those were all the techniques, all the ways, all the setup options, if you want to say, and you can of course know which one suits you the best and go with it. Now I want to give you a summary about what I talked about tonight. I was mentioning all the techniques or all the ways of having a DJ setup, whether it's with vinyl players, as I said, the analog vinyl player, the real vinyl turntable, or the digital edition of it, which is called a DVS. It's a digital vinyl system, which is using a virtual vinyl, same touch, same feel of the actual vinyl, but this digital vinyl is just emitting some frequencies that can trigger or control some features in your software. Okay, and the third one was using the multiplayers or CD players / USB players, etc. Those are nowadays the industry standards, like the Pioneer, CDJs, etc. This is it's very important. It has all the features that you need. It has features that you can use. It has features that you might not like to use, like the sync, like quantize, etc. You also have the Ableton live performance. That's also one way of DJing. It's not really flexible for DJing only. It's more into performance, not only in DJing. You also have digital controllers, which is a MIDI controller you use connected to your laptop, and you are controlling a software. And with software, you have endless possibilities. You have more features. You have a lot of things that you might not be able to do on CD player, or on, of course, not on vinyl at all, and on other techniques. And you also have a phone / tablet way of mixing. You can use just your iPhone, have an application, audio output to a mixer, and you can mix a perfect set. Okay, and the last one is a hybrid system. Hybrid system is when you combine many of what I mentioned before together, like when you have, for example, a controller with a laptop and a CD player and a vinyl player, let's say. Okay, and Ableton maybe, and a band, and so those were all the 5, 6, 7 ways. I forgot how many they were, and it's up to you to choose one of the ways. The standard, the industry standard now is the CD player or the multiplayer, and we are moving towards performance, towards digital MIDI controller technology, etc. Rarely you can find people mixing on vinyl. So if you had this confusion in mind, I think this session I discussed all the possibilities, all the ways of performing. Okay. Thank you all for being with me on the 6th episode of G.GOES Live. I enjoyed every second of it as usual. Really, thank you. I can't thank you enough. I always see you guys. I always see common names. I always see fans of this show, G.GOES Live, every week on my Facebook live chat room. It's 10 p.m. Next week I will have a guest with me, and the week after the guest with me as well. This show is going to be every Wednesday, as I said. It will not stop unless you want me to. And really thank you guys, and until the next episode, I send you all my love, and I send you all my greetings from the newly renovated Per-vurt studio in Beirut. Cheers, you guys. Good night.